Welcome to Teaching Orchestra. In this video, I'm going to be going over some of the phrasing challenges in Sahara Crossing by Richard Meyer. In the first two measures, we get this pizzicato rhythmic background, and then the violins and violas come in on a dotted half note, quarter note, and then some more half notes underneath this rhythmic figure. Right off the bat, we're faced with phrasing difficulties because we have an asymmetrical bowing all the way back in measure 3. And what's our opening dynamic? That's right, piano. Yikes. Hey, Teaching Orchestra, what's the big deal? Why is this such a problem? Well, let me tell you what the big deal is. The big deal is that your students will naturally obliterate beat 4 like my car windshield against a mayfly on a Texas summer night. And if we don't do something about it, we're going to look at the performance like I look at my windshield at the end of a drive and think, did I win or did the flies win? So what do we do about it? We have to add a crescendo to the dotted half notes by adding weight to our bows and not use very much weight on the quarter note. This is going to make it much more musical for that measure and for that phrase. But then what? We continue to phrase. Let's keep looking forward for a hint. In measures 9 and 10, we get crescendo diminuendo. Let's count backwards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Now we know the phrasing for 2 measures, and we have 6 left over. This looks like, without even looking at the harmonic progression, we can pretty much guess it's going to be 4-bar phrases. So what are we going to do? Crescendo 3, diminuendo 1. If we remember this from measure 3, it's going to solve our dotted half note quarter note issue, and we can recover using a heavy bow on the next 2 half notes to grow the phrase before we take it back. On the second half note in measure 5, make sure that in the bow we recover back to the lower half of the bow. We can fudge the preceding half note, to make up for this quarter note. But on this half note, we need to make sure that we come back to the lower half of the bow, or we're going to run into problems later. Like in measure 6, for instance, this might not sound as good as it needs to if we're trapped in the upper half of the bow. Also in measure 3, make sure we start in the lower half of the bow for violins and violas. That'll give us some room to work with. This might be an issue for some violinists and some violists at this level because of their bow hands, and they might avoid the lower half of the bow because they can't make good tone in the lower half, and they might not make good tone in the lower half because the wrist is locked, and their wrist might be locked because their thumb is straight. Oh, this reminds me of that song. Okay, measure 11. It's the same thing, right? Piano dynamic, dotted half note, quarter note. We do the same thing that we did back in measure 3, start in the lower half of the bow. Okay, so when we do this retake here, make sure we retake to the lower half, and then we do our 4-bar phrase. Careful not to get too carried away in measure 14, because we got to start a new phrase here in measure 15. That's the 4-measure phrase, right? Measure 18 is pretty important because of the forte coming up in measure 19. So if we play this phrase correctly and we come back in 18, we should have some great dynamic contrast here in 19 and make for some really effective musicianship. Sometimes with the younger groups, they don't always phrase consistently. They might get the first few and then they start to forget. But don't worry, because they have this rest. And a rest is like an infinite diminuendo, right? You can't play any softer than a rest, right? Well, it's what we call a menial caesura, and it's a great orchestration which emphasizes the forte coming up in measure 19, as does the arco in the lower strings, because they go from pizzicato to arco, and that's going to help too with this forte and make your orchestra sound dynamic. Measure 19 starts the B section, and we switch to 2-bar phrases. 2-bar phrases. And then we get a phrase extension here before we get into this part, which transitions back to the A theme. Now, this section we know already, right? Because we just played it before. However, there is a bit of a difference in measure 35. The first violins get some counterpoint here. For younger players, this rhythm might be tricky because it starts on a rest and they've got some eighth notes, so that's why in the teaching companion available on teachingorchestra.com, I had some rhythm exercises to help isolate this rhythm on an open D to help them learn it faster. Here's rhythm exercise number 9, and they have 1, 2, and 3, hold 2 and 3. Now, don't just play this and then move on into the half position exercises. Have them repeat it over and over again and make sure that they can do it. And if this doesn't challenge them enough, do it up a D major finger pattern, maybe doing the half position pattern or something like that from the beginning of the teaching companion. Or maybe have them try the major pattern depending upon what you want. Probably if you're relating it to the A theme in 35, you want to use the major pattern because they've got those C sharps. So that might be the best thing for you. And while I'm here talking about the teaching companion, we do have rhythmic exercises to help them with the dotted half note quarter notes. And it's not just about the rhythm, it's about the bow control too. And we've got accents, we've got all kinds of stuff just so that they know the bow technique to help them learn it faster. All right, let's look back in Sahara Crossing in measure 41 when we get a return of the B section. We get our last phrase here at 41. We get this rest, and then we're loud again in 43. Cellos and basses are arco, just like it was previously. Now, there's some variation here, right? Because previously, the violins have the melody, and the cellos and basses have the 2 quarter notes here. However, the violins and violas have what appear to be double stops. To double stop, or not to double stop. I wouldn't, because you don't want your upper strings to dominate your low strings because they have the melody, and you don't really need a lot of upper strings here. In 48, it says to play at the tip, and what I say is no, because why would you want to be at the tip for this quarter note and then play these half notes with a crescendo all the way to 52? That's not good. I would start in the lower middle, and that'll give us more bow to work with. So scratch out tip, please. That's not a good idea. We could probably play in the lower middle. Here in measure 52, don't get too carried away with the quarter, eighth, eighth, quarter, eighth, eighth, the shuffle rhythm here. We need to use lots of bow on the first half note and the first violins because we've got to be in the upper half to make sure that we've got enough room to bow a half note tied to the quarter note. And the same thing here in 54. The goal is to play these quarter notes in the middle of the bow, and if we can use that as our target, we're probably going to be in good shape. So after this rest, we probably want to start this down bow at the balance point and then bow to the upper half, and then take this down bow back to the middle so that we can play these all in the middle. Up bow, down bow in the lower half, middle again. Try to make the focus on the melody here and not on the shuffle rhythm. Don't let the rest of your orchestra get a little too raucous and cover up the melody. So maybe lighter, maybe a little more detached with your bowings too, so that it's a little more rhythmic and less pad. Another trick to help bring out the melody is to make the background parts here phrase a little bit. Crescendo 1, decrescendo 1, 2-bar phrases, right? And that might help draw some interest to the violin part and create some counterpoint. Because look, If they're crescendoing here, it's going to be while the first violins are sustaining. When they're decrescendoing here, we have motion here. So it's going to work out really nicely with some counterpoint if we phrase appropriately. All right, all we have left to talk about is the crescendo and into the del segno, and then we're home free with the phrasing. So here, before the del segno, we have all of these half steps, and we go back and forth and back and forth. We're getting louder and louder. Left hand pizzicato, and then the rest are regular right hand pizzicato, back to the del segno with the Sahara crossing motor rhythm. It would be great if your students could play with strong fourth fingers, especially in Sahara crossing. And so in my next video, we're going to be talking about finger building, and I hope to see you then.